Baie dankie meneer die ceremoniemeester dat u my hier so die kans gee om te praat voor ek moet eet. Want dit is beter vir die spysvertering om het so om te doen. Ek het nou net so pas hier met 'n dametjie van die SAIK gepraat oor wat ek vandag hier gaan sê en dit in Afrikaans gedoen. En nou as jy my sal verskoon, sal ek maar wat ek te sê het verder 'n slag in Engels voordra en ek sal maar liewer bly by my teks. Anders soos 'n gewone professor as ek begin uitwy, dan sal my toespraak die normale 40 minute neem. En ek is seker daarvan die seremoniemeester gaan my nie toelaat om so lank te praat nie. Ladies and gentlemen, what I want to talk about is one of the major concerns about the state of economic affairs today, namely uncertainty about our economic and our political future, particularly among people who have to make important decisions in this country of ours. Young people, students, who have to prepare themselves now for the challenges and opportunities they may encounter in the decades ahead of them, must explore the sort of situations that they might find themselves in a decade or so from now. What they ask me, very often ask me, what, for example, is the likely nature of fiscal and economic policy going to be in those days? And in answering that kind of question, we must be careful not to overlook the vitally important matter of social dynamics, the process of transformation from an apartheid society to a post-apartheid society. I'm not sure what exactly people mean by these two terms, but I'm sure in general we all are agreed that we are at the moment in position A, and we've got to get to position B, and the thing is how to get there. If we were on the North Pole and we had to go south, that would have been easy, because I understand if you are there, anywhere you go it would be south. But in our case, I'm afraid the sort of problem is not as easy as all that. To my mind, it's the most important question we do have to answer about this business of where we want to go is, do we really have a road to get there? The forces responsible for the nature and the significance of the expected change are, of course, the entry into the system of political economy by millions of people from the third world segment of South Africa. The walls of dualism in South Africa are crumbling, and the masses of non-enfranchised people from the periphery are moving in onto the core. First to feel the impact of this movement were, of course, the institutions of the market. That's been going on for quite some time. Presently, it is the institutions of public opinion, and finally, it is bound to be the institutions of government that's going to feel the impact of this integration of the third world of South Africa into the first world segment. These realities, I am sure, will shape the nature of our theories of government as we approach the 1990s. The direction into which these socio-political forces will change the fiscal objectives of South Africa are, however, very uncertain. There are probably many alternatives. But I'm sure you will agree with me when you talk to young people that basically the choice in South Africa is the choice of a trend towards socialism on the one hand, or towards an open society on the other hand. I think that completely dominates discussions among people who are looking forward to living in this country for the next 30 or 40 years. These two great ideas will be battling for the minds of people, for the support of public opinion in the next decade, and on the outcome of this war of ideas will depend the nature of politics in South Africa, including that of fiscal policy and monetary policy. When one considers that the most important battlefields of the ideological war are not in Parliament, but in the ghettos of South Africa, and that the level of debate will not be abstractly intellectual, one cannot rate the chances of the open society as very high. The language of Marxism, suggesting as it does inevitable economic injustice towards the masses in an open society, has surreptitiously penetrated deeply even into the way in which people describe reality to one another. When they think they're objective, using Marxist phrases, you really are prejudging the sort of norms, the sort of value judgments you're going to make. We seldom realize that, but that's a fact. If such prejudices become the firmly held ideology of the masses of South Africa in the 1990s, while the powers of government are still held by the present political dispensation, a disastrous conflict situation will arise, and one must expect that the dominant function of fiscal policy will have to be the financing of vast programs of expenditure on the maintenance of law and order and on defense. That will just be a holding operation. If, on the other hand, protagonists of the open society, and the Free Market Foundation certainly is in the forefront, the spearhead of this kind of ideological war, if these protagonists can somehow keep public opinion in the ghettos sufficiently interested in non-socialist ideas about the organization of society and the role of government in it, at least two more harmonious scenarios for fiscal policy and monetary policy, and probably economic policy in general, emerge. These scenarios assume that all leaders of public opinion in South Africa recognize that the supreme achievement of the political economy of South Africa in the 1990s must be a phenomenal improvement in the material circumstances of the lower income groups of this country. That there should have to be no further debate, no further public debate on this matter. Income growth for these people should be generally accepted as the South African New Deal in the final decades of the 20th century. Rather than arguing with the socialists and anybody else about how precisely to define and how to measure this objective, socialists should be invited to debate the most effective means of achieving it. And I do, if there's nothing else I have to try and communicate to you today, is this fact that we should not try to debate with socialists about the objectives in South Africa. They are pretty clear enough. But we must debate with them the means by which the system, the political system in South Africa, can achieve those objectives. The objective of a more equal distribution of income can obviously be achieved more effectively under conditions of rapid economic growth than under conditions of economic stagnation. And to show that stagnation will almost certainly set in under a socialist system of political economy is certainly not difficult, particularly because there are so many examples of this fate among countries in Africa itself. But it must also be demonstrated that economic stagnation can be avoided and rapid growth generated in an open African society. And that takes a little more doing. Such an exercise should at the same time suggest the nature of the appropriate economic policies to bring that about. The conception of such a process of growth with income redistribution is now I believe, rapidly emerging in South Africa from the growing recognition of the need and the opportunity for what has become generally known as inward industrialization. It is not difficult to show that this idea represents the necessary economic support base of the inevitable process of rapid and large-scale urbanization in South Africa, or in more abstract terms. It's not difficult to show that inward industrialization inevitably flows from the integration of the third world of South Africa into its first world institutions. It is also not difficult to show how this process can not only serve the objective of a more equal distribution of income better and more surely than anything the socialist theories of fiscal confiscation can come up with, but that it can also save the South African economy from the secular stagnation which has beset its first world productive engine in the past decade or longer. And that's a subject about which I'm sure many of you can sort of talk and discuss the whole afternoon. But I don't know whether you have realized, looking at the statistics, that our first world economy has, since 1974, picked up the typical sickness of an old industrial country, of secular stagnation, nowhere to go, and, quite pleased with the prospect. Our political and our economic needs for widespread inward industrialization, as it has been defined, is almost obvious. So we have on our doorstep the solution to the problem of avoiding that stagnation for the economy as a whole and its first world segment as well. The questionable aspects of the realism of the idea is not on the demand side of the process. The demands will obviously be there, or rather the needs, to turn the needs for housing and education and food and transport facilities and recreation, to turn all those needs into effective demand. Well, that needs income. And income arises from production in any sort of successful economic system. So, I mean, the problems, and whether the sort of idea is realistic, does not arise on the demand side. It arises on the supply side of the idea. The questionable aspect there concerns the large-scale reallocation of productive resources that it requires. Well, let me say that even, in a macroeconomic sense, there's no supply-side problem. I mean, this country is at the moment saving vastly more than it is investing. We are actually, we last year saved 7 billion rands more than we have invested. That's why we had the money to pay back our overseas debt. If we were growing that fast, we might have had a problem. Mind you, if we had been growing that fast, we wouldn't have a withdrawal of capital in the first place, so you know how it goes. But the fact is that we are saving vastly more than we are investing back in our own country. If you are talking about this investment, ladies and gentlemen, this investment is not only taking place overseas, it is by size taking place much more seriously inside the country. But be that as it may, we do have the savings from the first world machine to get this business going. And we do have the manpower from the third world. I don't know how many of you have been looking at the statistics about the growth in the number of matriculants coming out of our school processes and the number of trained people coming out of these new training establishments, partly financed through the Department of Manpower and partly by industry itself. Hundreds and thousands of people have been trained, literally hundreds and thousands of people have been trained in the last couple of years through those channels. that kind of supply side is there. But who's going to put it all together? Who's going to organize it in such a way that it really becomes an effective, productive process? So the problem, the questionable aspects of the realism of the idea concern the large-scale reallocation of productive resources that this requires. For example, production processes will have to become less capital intensive, more manpower intensive. Both capital and manpower will have to be deployed to industries producing the more standard and less luxurious goods and services demanded by lower income groups. Much of domestic savings currently channeled through financial institutions towards investment in gilt-edged securities of the government and a few parastatals or blue chip stocks of a few large existing mines and industries. Much of those savings will have to be redirected towards the loan and the equity capital requirements of thousands of small businessmen subcontracting for the big companies, etc. The question is how this reallocation of productive resources is to come about. Can this task be left to free market forces? What is the role of government in making making this transformation take place as rapidly as possible? The two possible kinds of open society systems are, on the one hand, the so-called free market system, and on the other hand, the market-orientated mixed society. The difference in the two systems lies, of course, in the extent of government involvement in the economy. In the first alternative, the major political action required consists of a vast program of privatization of activities currently undertaken by government agencies and an equally vast program of deregulation of activities currently undertaken by private enterprise but seriously constrained by thousands of unnecessary regulations and licensing procedures. In the financial field, the pure free market approach seems to require that all subsidies be abolished and the taxes be reduced as much as possible, for which much scope would be created by privatization, deregulation, and the abolition of subsidies. The remaining taxes should be completely neutral as between different forms of economic activity, or more precisely, different forms of income generation. I'm not sure, I hope I'm right, Mr. Lowe, in saying that roughly that would be a free market approach to the solution of the policy problem in order to get inward industrialization on the move. Neutrality in monetary policy would likewise be the rule. And as I said, that would allow Dr. Dakaka and myself to improve our golf handicaps considerably. Interest rates would be positive to properly reflect the scarcity of capital relative to manpower, and the money supply would have to be prevented from inflating above the expected real growth rate of the economy. In this situation, relative prices would have a chance to guide the allocation of productive resources. Now, that's just one sentence. That's just one sentence, but it takes us a whole year in economics to prove that to students. So, but just please accept it, that the fundamental characteristic of a free market, a lively, flexible free market, is that relative prices guide people automatically to do the right thing. And it's quite an interesting proof. The hope of this approach is that ordinary market forces will automatically bring about the necessary inward industrialization, or at least the kind of economic growth that also produces a more equal distribution of income. All the processes of production, of consumer goods, housing, education, training, infrastructure, etc., will expand rapidly. But the expansion will be fully guided by free market forces and flexible market prices. One should bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that regulations, particularly those making entry into lucrative activities difficult, significantly protect the income of the people inside and reduce the income opportunities of others outside the industry. This effect on income distribution may have become very important in South Africa, and it probably discriminates significantly against people in lower income groups. Large-scale deregulation could therefore indeed become as important an instrument of growth and income redistribution as the more usual fiscal instruments in Western society. In this scenario, fiscal policy is obviously a modest matter, since the budget remains small while there are very few proactive things for the fiscal authorities to do. The free market forces will do it all. However, and I have to be realistic in what I'm saying in the sense that we have to get ahead rapidly and we have to be credible to the people who have to support us in this sort of approach. However, general political policy will be that much more difficult, since it will have to consist largely of trusting in market forces and keeping political constituencies convinced that these market forces will indeed automatically produce the desired results. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and my colleagues in the Free Market Foundation, I am afraid that such a self-effacing and rather unpopular style of government is probably not completely a practical proposition in South Africa, at least for the time being. Therefore, the remaining alternative to the disasters of socialism must be considered, and we must seriously think about our attitude towards that sort of that kind of philosophical approach. Namely, the proactive involvement of government in a market-orientated strategy towards rapid inward industrialization, not only through privatization and deregulation, which obviously are necessary preconditions for before anything else can succeed, but also through the use of its public financial powers. Accelerated and enriched programs for education and training, housing, urban infrastructure will have to be financed by government agencies. It might also be necessary to deviate from the ideal of a neutral tax system in order to induce private financial institutions and others to take the risks initially involved in channeling savings in large amounts into the investment projects involved in this inward industrialization. And I leave it there. Finally, just one final word, if you will allow me. I think I'm old enough and I've experienced enough throughout the whole history of economic policy to kind of force in this final paragraph. There is unfortunately a strong possibility that the magnitude of this strategy might be seriously underestimated, as the economic and financial implications of the strategy of grand apartheid were hopelessly underestimated. That's, again, another subject. What is basically at issue in inward industrialization is no less than the functional integration of a numerically vast third world segment of the South African economy into its numerically small first world segment. Had the newly entering segment been small relative to the existing system, the issue could be regarded with some equanimity. But that is, of course, not the position at all. The number of people in South Africa's third world is, of course, a multiple of those in its first world. You know that in the 1990s, the black urban population will be increasing at the rate of 600,000 people per annum, compared with the white population increase in the cities of 30,000 per annum. It has been estimated that about 150,000 houses per year will be needed to cater for this population growth. The cost of providing these houses may represent an outlay exceeding the country's total investment in residential buildings in 1986. As a rough calculation, but I think it's more or less correct. In similar ways, the consumer demand, the employment, the transport requirements, etc., of this rapidly growing third world will have to be recognized as the dominant parameters of economic activity in South Africa in the 1990s. Not a marginal issue to be treated sort of more or less on a par with 10 or 12 or 15 of the other issues in economic policy and fiscal allocation, but the dominant issue. To regard these realities as interesting but merely marginally important new features of the fiscal scenario for the 1990s will, as I said, be a serious mistake, as it was a serious mistake for fiscal policy in the 1960s to look upon the strategy of separate development in such a bland spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lombard. It's my pleasure to, now that everybody's arrived, formally welcome you all. There are some distinguished people around, and one is inclined to want to mention them. I'm sure you recognize many faces. And some of our patrons, to whom we extend a special welcome. In particular, we welcome 3 of our past free market awardees, who I see here. If there are more, then please forgive me. I see Terry Markman, Geert de Wet, and Simon Fisk, who's up with us from Pietermaritzburg. And it's my pleasure now to get to announcing who the free market awardee is for 1987. But before doing that, let me mention that you should have noticed as you came in a whole lot of materials relating to the With Justice for All training course. Please take some brochures for them as you leave, and also a new Free Market Foundation tie and a Free Market Foundation scarf, which I think you should all buy at least one of as you leave, preferably 2, one to pass on to someone else. Well, the Free Market Award this year has been as difficult and even more difficult than in the past. It seems to get more difficult every year, which I think is a very good sign. And every year we are tempted to introduce additional awards for people who you really feel cannot not receive an award. The nominees have been made this year that one feels just very, very painful about having to turn down those nominations. But in the end, the prestige of the award requires that there be just one award every year. And all of those for whom nominations have been received get carried over, and no doubt we'll be able to make those awards in the future. The award this year goes to somebody who has been an extraordinarily big achiever in promoting free market ideas and promoting economic freedom in South Africa, and one who has been on the short list of nominees in previous years. But this year the nomination carries more weight than ever before. The awardee I'll name now and then provide a citation for that nomination. The awardee is Marc Swanepoel. I'm going to ask our President, Dr. Lombard, to make the award to Mr. Swanepoel, and then I will follow by a citation to justify the award. Dr. Lombard, if you'll come and make the award. The award consists of a hand-painted certificate and a Kruger Rand. The Kruger Rand is donated to us by the Chamber of Mines every year. We hope into the future as well, even if the price of gold does go up a lot more, and for which we especially thank the Chamber of Mines.
Well, Mark, let me congratulate you and say that from the Free Market Society's point of view, our hope really is in activities such as yours that is really penetrating into the minds and the hearts of the young people looking forward to a bright future. The way you've been doing it is an example to us all. Congratulations. Thank you very much. You want me to take his hand again? No? So, Mark, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Right? Another one.
Marc.
Well, okay. I don't know where to do it from. It's not working, is it? Well, Mark, can you see?
Can you do it on? Can you repeat that performance on this side for television?
Well, Simon, handshake. Well, firstly, congratulations. Bye-bye. I don't have to say anything again, do I? Well,
Thank you.
that's on.
Just wait up here. I'm going to ask Mark to wait here whilst I provide a citation for him, and then he will have a few words to say in his acceptance speech. Marc was one of the first people, and probably the first person in South Africa, if there are others we don't know about them, to discover the new free market movement that emerged in the world during the late 1960s. It was at the time when the new left movement of the early 60s was starting to decline and has now virtually disappeared in the world. And right in the very early stages, there were a couple of pioneer free market thinkers who were bringing about what Dr. de Kock called during the 70s the classical revival. From the 1930s, there had been a gradual decline in free market sentiment around the world, in economics and in all the social sciences. In the late 60s, there was a rediscovery of the free market ideas and a rediscovery of the classical wisdom. And this was partly as a result, of course, of the manifest failure of interventionism throughout the world, but also because of a new breed of tremendous scholars that has emerged. Marc Swanepoel at that time felt like a lone voice. There were a few academics like Dr. Lombard himself at Pretoria University, but certainly there was no popular sympathy outside of academic institutions for the market. Marc ran a little newspaper advertisement calling for people who had discovered the free market via the same route he had, which had been through the literature of Ayn Rand. As a result of that advertisement, a friend of mine introduced me to him. I myself was not, and am still not, a Randian follower. But we then, Marc and a few other people, formulated the concept in the mid-1970s, 1975, of the Free Market Foundation. He was one of the key elements in the existence of this organization, a group of 6 who first conceived of it. Marc went on to become the first South African correspondent of the major free market journal, popular journal in the world, Reason magazine in the USA, became the founding editor of the only what we might call hardcore, purist free market or libertarian journal in South Africa, The Individualist. He started giving lectures on free enterprise for various companies, mining houses, first Anglo-American and then others, in the late 1970s, about 1978. And these lectures, at first about half an hour to workers, he was confronted with hardcore Ori Paulus white right-wing mine workers and hardcore Cyril Ramaphosa radical left-wing black mine workers, to whom he had to sell the same message and which was equally difficult to sell to both. He was spectacularly successful. By popular demand, these lectures he was presenting, demand of those on the courses, were extended to eventually full-day seminars and eventually 2-day seminars. Tens of thousands of people have been through Marc's seminars. He eventually developed these into a formal program with funding from the GenCore group, and then finally with substantial funding from GenCore and from Goldfields and substantial assistance in kind from the other groups in which these seminars were being run, produced the video program With Justice for All, which is possibly the most sophisticated economic education program in the world. Certainly is the most sophisticated we know of. Now, during the period of the late 60s and early 70s, institutes like ours, the Free Market Foundation, developed in virtually every country. There are perhaps a few hundred at the moment. All of them have been grappling with the problem of how do you communicate relatively sophisticated ideas on a massive scale to the average citizen. None has come up with anything remotely as promising as the With Justice for All program that Marc has developed and written over 10 years of intensive experience. Full details of the program are available outside, and I'd urge you all who don't already know about it to find out. The program is a spectacular success, and we have no doubt in time will be franchised all over the world. It's already being run in scarcely into its second year by 78 companies in South Africa. Over 50,000 workers have been through it. There's now a massive program to get it into schools, community groups and churches. It is universally popular. Constantly we are working on improvements. Marc is working on improvements. And I don't think I exaggerate if I say that if this country is to be saved, if the things Dr. Lombard was talking about, that is getting people to accept the free enterprise view as opposed to the statist, socialist, communist view as the order for a future South Africa, if we are going to achieve that, I don't think it's an exaggeration that it will be dependent on the ability to get this program saturated throughout South Africa, to get millions of South Africans exposed to it. What is unique about it, and very exciting, it is the first method that has been devised of exposing people intensively to business, economic and political education by means of a self-financing method. Companies who run the program pay for it because of the benefits they get out of improved worker attitudes towards the company, towards productivity, towards the economic system that the company wants to see in a future South Africa, specifically not the one that we have now. So with that, let me say that this is a monumental achievement. It's spectacularly successful. It is exciting and could make a major contribution to the dissemination of the ideas which we espouse, not just in South Africa, but worldwide. Right now we are negotiating for franchising this in the USA, which would be a market, of course, so big that we can't conceive it. So with that, let me invite Marc to give us a short acceptance speech. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you, Leon. Dames en heren, ek sê baie dankie vir die eer wat aan my hier bewys word deur middel van hierdie toekenning. Ek hoop dit sal in die toekoms wys dat dit vir ons in ons land baie sal beteken. The honor doesn't belong to me alone, of course. There were many people over the years, especially over the last 10 years, friends of mine, as well as many other individuals, who created a climate of opinion which made the Justice for All cause possible. 10 years ago, this cause would not have been accepted in companies. I thank them for it. And also companies, those companies who had the courage to try it during a time when most of the workers there did not agree with those ideas either. They also deserve the honor. I thank you for that too. Eustace has asked me to write out my little speech. I don't normally speak with a piece of paper, but he knows me well enough to know that maybe I'll, like Professor Lombard has said, wander off in some free market directions here. So I'll try my best to stick to my written speech. Now, Professor Lombard has said that we have to get from point A to point B. And Leon has a very nice little joke that he tells that I have to repeat here. And that is the chap who came to watch rugby in Johannesburg at Ellis Park. And eventually he found himself in one of the coloured townships there in the far western part of Johannesburg, and he stopped somewhere to ask for directions. And the chappie that was trying to help him said to him, "I'll tell you what, you go along this road here, and you go for about 2 kilometers, and then you turn left at the robot, and you go for another 2 or 3 blocks, and there's a yield sign, and you go to the right there." And then he said, "No, wait a minute, that's not quite right. You go for about 4 kilometers before you get that robot, and then you turn to the right first." No, wait, that's not quite right either. He said, "You know what, if you want to get to Ellis Park, this is not the right place to start." We have exactly the same problem in South Africa. If we want to get where we want to go, this is not the right place to start. But unfortunately, that is the given. We have to start here. Now, as we all know, we're living through a period of lots of turbulence in South Africa. It has already resulted in tragedy for many people. And unless we find a better solution for a better future, it will cause unimaginable hardship and tragedy for many, many more. Now, in South Africa at the moment, we have a conflict of visions. One of those visions is trying to lead people in the direction of socialism. It's a dead-end street that will eventually result in major conflicts. One cannot blame South African blacks, unfortunately, for looking at that socialist utopia. Because if you're a black person and you listen to what politicians say from public platforms, many individuals say from public platforms, they're all saying we must save our free enterprise system. They talk as if we have a free enterprise system. And if you're a black person in Soweto struggling with all the indignities, all the overcomable barriers that you see from day to day, then you cannot blame them for saying, well, if this is free.
Will strike at the new Largo colliery in response to the dismissal of 27 workers after an assault on a senior employee. Workers at the SA Coal Estates, Bank and Goede Hoop collieries had gone on strike in sympathy with the new Largo walkout. Negotiations are in progress with the National Union of Mine Workers.
TV1 biedt u rechtstreeks uit Johannesburg. Netwerk met die nuus en die storie daarachter.
Nuus hooftrekke vanaand. Die weermag vier sy 3/4 eeu met vasbeslotenheid en nuwe wapentuig. Die bierstaking se doppie klap. 'n Opsienbarende gifmoordverhoor begin. 'n Toeloop om die nuwe obligasies vir mense oor 60. En dramatiese tennis in die kwart eindronde op Wimbledon.